Hello and welcome. You're with us here, another episode of the Global Reset with me, Prashant Nair. This is the program where we try and explore the intricate web of geopolitics, trade, conflicts that's really reshaping the world in more ways than one. You're with us here on CNBC-TV18 Prime. Lined up on the show today, we have Dr. Ori Goldberg, who's an Israeli academic and analyst specializing in modern Iran and the intersection of religion and politics in the Middle East. His recent commentary on the Iran-Israel conflict and broader regional dynamics reflects a critical, sometimes pessimistic view of Israel's current political and military trajectory, as well as its international standing. He'll be with us in just a bit from now. We will also have Harsh V Pant, Vice President, Studies and Foreign Policy at the Observer Research Foundation. He's widely recognized for his expertise on Asian security, India's foreign policy, and global strategic trends as well. So, two experts joining us in just a bit. But before I get to the discussion, let me get you up to speed with the tensions which are simmering and, of course, the actual war which is underway between Israel and Iran. Now, after Israeli strike on Iranian state television, Iran is now claiming that they are preparing in what could be the largest and most intense missile attack in the history of Israeli soil. Meanwhile, Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu was heard claiming that killing the Iranian supreme leader, Ayatollah Khamenei, would not escalate, but in fact end the conflict.
We did everything we could to enable President Trump to negotiate the desired result, and that would have been preferable for us and I think for everyone. But we saw in the course of the negotiations, while they were negotiating with the United States, the supreme leader of Iran, Ayatollah Khamenei, tweeted almost every day, "Death to Israel." The talks were merely a facade.
So are you going to target the supreme leader?
Look, we're doing what we need to do. I'm not going to get into the details.
U.S. officials tell us that the president flatly rejected a plan, an opportunity that the Israelis had to take out the supreme leader. Do you understand his concern? My understanding is his concern is that this would escalate the conflict beyond where it is already.
It's not going to escalate the conflict. It's going to end the conflict.
Well, it's pretty clear. In an effort to attend to these escalations overnight, you had both U.S. President Donald Trump and Secretary of State Marco Rubio, who've left the G7 summit a day early.
Well, I have to be back. Very important. I want to just thank our great host. We did a fantastic job. Thank you to Canada. But you probably see what I see, and I have to be back as soon as I can. But have dinner with these wonderful leaders, and then I get on the plane. I have to be back early for the obvious reasons.
Well, as the conflict continues, leaders of the G7 nations have issued a joint statement declaring that, and I quote, Iran can never have a nuclear weapon, end of quote, while calling for an immediate de-escalation across West Asia. Okay, well, in fact, French President Macron was heard saying that an offer has already been made for a ceasefire. Listen in.
Écoutez, il y a une offre qui a été faite, en effet.
There is an offer that has been made, indeed, of meetings and exchanges. There is an offer that has been made, especially to have a ceasefire and to initiate broader discussions. And I think this is a very good thing. So now we need to see what the stakeholders will do. The president spoke a few minutes ago to say that there were ongoing discussions, which is a good thing. And so if the United States of America can achieve a ceasefire, it is a very good thing, and France will support it, and we wish for it. Then, I say it is absolutely essential that all strikes from both sides against energy, administrative, and cultural infrastructures, and even more so against the civilian population, cease. Nothing justifies this, and they are absolutely intolerable.
Well, just as Trump departed from the G7 summit in Canada, there was a post on social media from President Trump, and this is the exact quote. Publicity-seeking President Macron of France mistakenly said that I left the G7 summit in Canada to go back to D.C., that is Washington, D.C., to work on a ceasefire between Israel and Iran. Wrong. He has no idea why I'm now on my way to Washington, but it certainly has nothing to do with a ceasefire. Much bigger than that. Whether purposely or not, Macron always gets it wrong. Stay tuned. That's the end of quote. Well, I think the big question, of course, is will the U.S. enter the conflict in one way or the other, or will it use its considerable influence in the region with Israel, of course, but also with Iran to try and de-escalate the situation? Let's actually get some perspective now from from David Roche, strategist at the Quantum Strategy. This is what he had to say.
It is that the United States, Trump, wants to have a peace deal with Iran, and it is using Israel to beat up Iran until it agrees to have a peace deal with the United States. That's the first thing. The second thing is the Israeli war aims are different to the United States, which, as I say, is looking for a peace deal. What Israel really wants is regime change in Iran, because that would replace the mullahs with something more secular, which might be hostile to Israel, but not in the kind of ideological zealotry-driven way that the mullahs preach every day, that Israel has got to be wiped off the face of the earth. So those two aims are different. Peace deal on the American side, regime change on the Israeli side.
Well, let's go straight across to Israel, to Tel Aviv. We're now joined by Dr. Ori Goldberg. He's an expert on international affairs, and of course, he's been critical of the way Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has conducted the war on Gaza specifically. Dr. Goldberg, thanks very much for joining us. Trust that you and your family are safe. You are in Tel Aviv. So I think the audiences here would like to get an update from you. What is happening? What is the situation on the ground, sir?
Situation on the ground has been that for every night since this war with Iran began, and sometimes midday as well, Israel has been attacked by missiles from Iran, as of course Israel continues to carry out its strikes in the skies over Tehran and purportedly over various other cities in the country. I've actually just come back to my apartment after a morning barrage. I was sheltering in the communal shelter. This is now our nightly routine. So the entire country is after about 5 nights of very little sleep, and tempers are frayed. While people are technically supposed to be working, there's a lot of confusion when it comes to who's at work and who isn't, who's operating on emergency systems and who is not. The Israeli military is striking in Iran, and its strikes are more and more targeted towards representability, that is being able to show that it is striking. It isn't clear what the end game is. It isn't clear where an off-ramp might be located. It isn't clear what the point of this war is so far.
One of the things which I think Israel is famous for is its air defenses, right? And has been much wanted, and the Iron Dome and other sort of air missile defenses. What you're telling us, Dr. Goldberg, is that some of these projectiles are getting through, and they've been getting through since this war began, and today is day 5.
Very much so. They've been getting through. They've been hitting strategic sites. They've also been hitting civilian neighborhoods, but in Israel, strategic sites are never far from civilian neighborhoods, and missiles are not a particularly exact science, so that is to be expected. According to an IDF assessment, more than 90% of the Iranian missiles are targeting military sites. The thing is, I mean, Israel has been accusing Hamas in Gaza for nearly 2 years that it is using its civilians as human shields. In Israel, military and strategic sites are often located in close proximity to civilian homes, so the situation in Israel is not all that different than it is from Gaza. The air defense systems are working, but they're not working perfectly. Projectiles are getting through, they are hitting, there are impacts, and there have been casualties, both lethal and injured.
Dr. Goldberg, what is your, as a keen observer of what's been happening, what is your assessment? We've heard lots of things from President Trump, so I'm not sure anyone knows what to make of it. Yesterday there was this comment that, well, sometimes you've got to fight it out, but at the same time, well, peace is coming. That was yesterday. Today you got more. What's your sense? Yeah.
We certainly did. I would like to point your attention and the viewers' attention to the fact that Israel's prime minister also considers tweets to be a reason for war. I mean, he just quoted the Iranian supreme leader's tweets as proof that Iran doesn't really mean what it says when it negotiates with the United States. So it's quite hard to tell what Israel wants as well. And my answer begins with that. My assessment is that Israel has no clear end game. The war began with the notion that Israel wants to decapitate or terminate the Iranian nuclear program. The Israeli military said Israel wants to slow down the Iranian nuclear program. Now the prime minister is talking about regime change and making very much unbased comments like if the Iranian supreme leader is assassinated, then the conflict stops, or addressing the Iranian people and calling on them to rise up in rebellion when it's become abundantly clear that the longer Israel attacks, the more the Iranian people supports the Islamic Republic. So my assessment is that nobody knows what will happen. President Trump's, let's call it energetic spirit, only adds to that conclusion. Additionally, to some extent, I agree with what David Roche said. The US and Israel are pursuing two different paths here. I don't know if Israel really is pursuing regime change. It's not clear at all that regime change can be effected the way Israel is doing it, but Israel is certainly seeking a violent change in the political dynamics of Iran. The United States is looking for something else. I think President Trump is still looking for a deal, not for a war. He has very little to gain from a war. His base does not like foreign wars, and he's been getting a lot of criticism, the right wing of the MAGA movement, regarding what seems like his commitment or his willingness to enter the war. So I don't know if that will actually happen. So I guess to sum it up, my assessment is that nobody's quite clear on what can happen. The dangers are tremendous. The potential for a miscalculation that will end in a more brutal war is also tremendous. But as things stand, Iran and Israel seem to be engaged in a tit for tat. Israel pulled out all stops right at the beginning when it struck Iran. Iran, it seems like, is trying to generate a more gradated response. It is launching missiles at increasing levels of potential damage. It has not yet launched its heaviest, most lethal missiles. So I believe this tit for tat will go on for several days at least before we hear anything remotely close to negotiations.
Dr. Goldberg, why did you think, these were in a way, they were called preemptive strikes? What was why do you think that this was the moment in time when Israel chose to strike Iran?
Oh, I don't think anybody's buying the preemptive strike argument. Our prime minister is using the preemptive strike because he believes that will garner Israel more legitimacy, and that is one of his main goals. He wants the criticism the world has been laying at Israel's door with regards to Israel's actions in Gaza to disappear. And there's nothing like a war with Iran to make that happen, particularly with regard to the Western world or the global North. Nothing preemptive at all about this. In any way, a strike like this could not be something that was meant to address an emergency. It has obviously been planned for many long months, perhaps even years. So this is as premeditated as strikes can come. I believe the main reason, again, for the timing of the strike was very much related to domestic Israeli politics and to Israel's stature in the international community. I think our prime minister had to go for broke. He had to go for a war, not for a limited strike or for a gradual escalation, because the responses to what Israel was doing in Gaza were turning more and more severe. And I believe he was afraid both for his own personal power and for Israel's potential to be accepted as a regular member of the family of nations.
So international legitimacy also a concern, along with, of course, concerns about his own standing within the country. Dr. Goldberg, just a quick, 2 points. One, Mr. Netanyahu's own, how much of this you think, and you think a lot of it is driven by his, him trying to appear as a strong man within the country, right? To try and kind of sort of, get that standing within. Is he
our very own Churchill? He idolizes Churchill.
Is he politically speaking? Does he have the backing of the masses in Israel? That is one, and also support for this campaign against Iran. What are the views?
For the short term, most certainly he has great support. Iran has long been the broadest consensus in Israeli politics. The official narrative, and at least a generation of Israelis has grown up on this narrative, perhaps even two, is that Iran is Israel's existential enemy, that it seeks to destroy Israel. You heard David Rosh say that, repeat that trope about how the mullahs, which is the derogatory term for the Islamic Republic's religious clerical rulers, preach daily that Israel must be wiped off the map of the earth. It doesn't matter if it's really true, and I don't think it is. That's the story Israelis have grown up on. So for Netanyahu to strike this chord, to pluck this string, was a very safe political gamble, certainly in the short term, because he has much support. And many Israelis believe that after 2 years of failure in Gaza, Israel is now due for a success, and that it is taking its destiny in its own hands, and that everything seems to be shaping up nicely. The problem is that this is very much a short-term understanding of the reality of the situation, both with regard to Iran's potential for resistance and with regard to Israel's ability to withstand the costs, both human and economic, of a two-front war in Gaza and in Iran. For example, very quickly, two Israeli soldiers have been killed since the war in Iran began, because forces have been withdrawn from Gaza, and it is now easier for Hamas to target Israeli forces on the ground there. There's no such thing as a free lunch. The fact that Netanyahu wants this PR opportunity to proclaim himself finally as the Israeli Churchill does not necessarily mean that Israel can bear the consequences of this strategic decision.
We'll leave it there for now, Dr. Goldberg. I mean, really insightful and sort of, contextual as well. Stay safe, and we'll sort of lean on you to get more regular updates as this sort of war, as you say, with no end in sight, no off-ramp, as you called it, for now at least, continues. But of course, all of us hope that, there is de-escalation and not escalation as we move forward. Thank you very much for that.
Thank you for having me.
Insight. Thank you. What we'll do is take a quick commercial break here. Come back, we'll have Professor Harsh V Pant, Vice President of the Observer Research Foundation, to discuss, what is India's position? It's a delicate balancing act with regards to Israel and Iran. That's coming up in just a bit. Welcome back. You're with us here on Global Reset on CNBC-TV18 Prime. We're discussing, of course, the fifth day of conflict, running conflict between Israel, Iran. Of course, the big question is what the U.S. really does. We have Professor Harsh V Pant, who's also now joining us, Vice President of the Observer Research Foundation. Professor Pant, thank you very much for joining me here on the program. Thank you very much for your time. We had a view coming in from Tel Aviv earlier in terms of what's happening there on the ground, and of course, how this is viewed, this conflict is viewed within Israel. What about India, sir? For India, we've had old traditional ties with Iran, very close ties with Israel. It's a very fine, delicate balancing act, isn't it, from an Indian foreign policy perspective?
Yes, I think Indian foreign policy in the Middle East has always been a delicate balancing act, and there have been multiple stakeholders all along. We have had Iran, Israel, and of course the Gulf, the Arab states in the Gulf. So, and we have prided ourselves in saying that, look, we have been able to maintain good relations with all three stakeholders, despite a very challenging strategic environment that Middle East often faces. And I think we will continue, and we have, as you would have seen in our response, we have continued to tread that line, very fine line. We want de-escalation. We don't want a war. Prime Minister Modi in Cyprus also repeated that this is not the era of war. And clearly, India believes that war should not be a means of achieving political objectives in this day and age. But I think the challenge is that when you have wars raging all around, then you have to shape your negotiating policy, strategy, diplomacy accordingly. And I think now, as this crisis escalates, and as your previous discussion was illuminating, there is no end in sight in the short term because it is expanding. Both sides are broadening their political objectives. In fact, Israel, it's not entirely clear to what aim they are moving forward with. And of course, Mr. Trump is the big wild card. He has gone away from the G7 saying something big is going to happen, whether that's negotiation, whether that's even greater escalation, one never knows. So India will certainly be caught because India has equities in the region. You don't want an escalating conflict. You don't want a Middle East that is burning. And I think the challenge would be how do you delicately put your position so that neither side is offended, because you want to continue to have stable relations with both, because both are important partners in their own right.
The immediate, Professor Pant, I'll get to other aspects as well. The immediate, from a financial market perspective, the immediate impact feed-through channel is seen, is oil is the feed-through channel. We already seen a bit of a bump up in oil prices since this began last week, 5 days back. The big one, of course, is the Strait of Hormuz, through which some 30% of global oil supply passes. We don't buy that much of, I don't think we buy any Iranian oil now. Even our purchases of Russian oil have dropped pretty dramatically from even a year ago. But of course, I mean, the price of oil itself can go up substantially, international oil prices. And of course, we import 80% of our needs. Do you see that as the big one from an economy perspective?
Absolutely. From in the short to medium term, that's going to be the biggest worry for Indian policymakers, because that's clearly the most important objective of India's foreign policy, is to sustain India's growth trajectory, economic growth trajectory, and developmental priorities are front and center. So any destabilization in a part of the world that is so critical for India's energy needs would certainly be looked at warily, and would certainly be taken into cognizance as you plan forward, as you make plans about your economy. And I think that's why any broader escalation is something that India would be hoping against, because even at this point, as you were mentioning, with a limited sort of conflict happening in the region that is only between two states at this point, we have seen the shifting landscape of oil prices, energy prices. I think if it escalates, if America comes in, if there is something big happens, and other countries join in, I think that's going to be a challenge. We have seen Russia and China, for example, positioning themselves more or less at this point with Iran. And we have seen America and Trump's continued support for Israel. And that does not bode very well for the larger trajectory of this conflict. And if that happens, certainly from a very geographically limited conflict, it might expand. And Middle East, by and large, the energy trading hub for India, the energy hub for India will get even more impacted. And that's something that India would be hoping against.
There's also a large Indian diaspora, right? I mean, in that part of the world. And of course, I mean, I think the government here in India has already issued advisories, etc. But do you think that is also top of mind when, with regards to foreign policy and how to deal and sort of, with this balancing act in this conflict?
Absolutely. I think, diaspora, of course, has two dimensions. One is in the immediate conflict, you have to evacuate them. And increasingly, Indian diplomacy has been focused on getting Indians out of conflict zones. We have seen that in other conflict zones, and India has done a great job in recent years. But I think the scale of Indian diaspora in the Middle East is quite extensive. So, and India will have to certainly keep a close eye on what is happening. And already we are seeing about some of our students in Iran asking for help, and Indian government giving them all the help that it possibly can. But certainly that's going to be a major challenge. The other challenge, of course, economically, is if the region the conflict ends up escalating, then you also have the issue of remittances coming from the region. So economically, we are also linked to our diaspora in ways that perhaps will impact the Indian economy much more substantively than we think. So I do think that there are wider issues about diaspora, that Indian security, remittance remittances, the wider issues of livelihoods and economic engagement. So by and large, this is a serious business for India. India considers Middle East as its extended part of its extended neighborhood. It's part of India's Indo-Pacific geography, and I think for that, India certainly would be hoping that the conflict does not get further widened or even escalates further. But this is not in our hands, and this is in the hands of the two main protagonists, but also in the hands of the US now, as Trump decides what he wants to do next with this.
Professor Pant, just a broader question: is it getting harder in a way? It is no longer a unipolar world, right? I mean, it's an increasingly multipolar world. But there are still blocks in that sense. And to remain non-aligned, looking after our own self-interest, foreign policy focused on advancing our own economic interests, is that going to keep getting harder as we go along, or you think we're in a good place? What is your sense, sir?
See, we are in a relatively good place because we certainly have enough interactions, engagements with all parties, with all key players in the world. So we managed to be very effective during the Ukraine war because we managed to have stable ties with the US, with Europe, with Russia. At the same time, it was very difficult diplomatic juggling act, but we managed to do it because India's economic power is attractive enough for most countries. India's growing global profile is attractive enough for most countries to have an independent engagement with India, irrespective of the challenges. But I do think that when it's very easy to talk about multipolarity. But I think operational realities of that multipolarity we are witnessing around us, which is that the world becomes very disorganized. The world becomes very chaotic. And I think that's what you are seeing in different parts of the world. There is a leadership vacuum. No one is willing to take leadership. There are no institutions that can manage some of these very deep-rooted conflicts. And that is what happens when you move from one era of the global order to another. And I think this is one period where we are witnessing a transition. And these transition periods often are very chaotic, very dangerous, very destabilizing.
Professor Pant, good insights. Thank you very much for joining us on this program today. Thank you indeed, and we'll lean on your expertise in the coming days and weeks as well. Thanks indeed.
Thank you.
Well, that is Professor Pant on how India and Indian foreign policy is viewing and dealing with this latest conflict in the Middle East. Well, it's a wrap on this edition of Global Reset. Thank you very much for staying with me. More programming continues on the other side on CNBC-TV18 Prime.